Lisa is canonically one of the most powerful characters in Genshin, having been the most talented sorceress to study at the Sumeru Academia in the last 2 centuries. Does she live up to her lore as a playable character? Well, not entirely. She's sort of an alright character when it comes to strength. That said, she does have some useful parts of her kit, and if you're here, you probably want to build her regardless of her character's strength. So today, I'm going to be going over how to play Lisa, her best build, and a couple teams so you can start using her. My name is Braxophone, and let's talk about Lisa. Since Dendro released, Lisa has been a lot better of a unit. However, she still does have a lot of issues that have gone relatively unsolved, like her energy problems. But we'll talk about those in just a minute. Lisa's elemental skill can do one of 2 things. The tap can throw an electro orb that marks enemies and deals low damage, and her hold skill is a very strong hit of electro. Her hold skill is the only part of her kit that generates energy, and when it hits, it can give 5 electro particles. Generally, you're not going to use her charge skill unless she's an on-fielder, which means that she'll have a lot of problems with energy just because her burst costs a lot, which we'll talk about in a second. Before that though, I want to go over her conductive stack mechanic. Lisa's elemental skill orbs give enemies 1 conductive stack. If you hit 2 enemies in extremely close proximity, you can actually gain 2 stacks with 1 orb, and with even more enemies, you can get up to 3 stacks with just 1 orb. Additionally, if you react with pyro or cryo using the orb, you also gain bonus stacks. You can't go past 3, so it doesn't matter a ton, but it can help you dish out more damage faster. You also get an Ascension passive that makes it so Lisa's charged attack also applies stacks, so you have that option as well later on. Lisa's elemental burst, in my opinion, is the best part of her kit, and as mentioned before, it costs a lot of energy. It needs 80 to activate, and because of that, you're going to need to meet pretty high energy requirements for her in the build section. Outside of that, her burst creates a circle of electro that deals consistent electro damage and lasts for 15 seconds. Now, when I say consistent, I mean that it's constantly targeting someone to hit with an electro attack. Her lightning attacks can only target 1 enemy per hit and don't prioritize dendro cores, so at Constellation 3 or below, Lisa sort of feels bad to play as a Hyperbloom unit. Her burst does have a super powerful utility that's pretty hard to come by though. Once you unlock her second passive ability, she can shred enemy defense by 15% for 10 seconds when an enemy is hit by her burst. Keep in mind, this is different from Resistance Shred, and when combined with Resistance Shred can be an insanely powerful tool for increasing your damage. As for talent priority, it depends on your build. Like if you use her on field, then her basic attack is important, but off field her burst is. So to be honest, it doesn't really matter much, just level them all. Lisa isn't a perfect character, and to be honest, she's still not that great in comparison to many of your other electro options, but with the release of Dendro, she's become a lot better from how she started. So next up, before I show you the builds, let's talk about her constellations and how usable she is at Constellation 0. Lisa's constellations aren't necessary for every playstyle, but she really does feel much stronger with them. For example, her Constellation 1 gives her energy back for each opponent hit by her hold elemental skill, up to a maximum of 10 energy or 5 enemies. It's nice for on-field Aggravate Lisa, but it doesn't really see a lot of value elsewhere. Her second constellation doesn't do a ton, but it makes her comfier and safer to play by giving her an increased resistance to interruption, as well as a defense increase when holding her skill, which once again is great for Aggravate, but not really super big outside of that. Her third constellation increases her burst level by 3. Her fourth constellation is probably her most important one because it makes Hyperbloom Lisa significantly better to play. As mentioned before, her lightning arcs from her burst target enemies and don't focus on dendro cores, which means that you have to hit an enemy right next to a core or in that core hitbox in order to proc a Hyperbloom with her burst. With her Constellation 4, since her burst will send out more lightning bolts at a time, she can trigger more Hyperblooms. It's an amazing constellation for her and basically enables Hyperbloom Lisa to even be playable. Constellation 5 increases her skill level by 3, and Constellation 6 makes it so that you can instantly give enemies 3 conductive stacks when she swaps on field. This will save you a couple of seconds when you use her hold skill and can make her usable with other carries as a quick swap nuke, but it's not super necessary. Overall, C0 Lisa is an okay unit if you choose to use her, but for Hyperbloom she feels pretty bad to play without Constellation 4. It's not going to change your life or anything, but if you do have C4, you'll probably have a better time playing Lisa overall. Next up, we're going to go over how to fix Lisa's energy issues. This video is sponsored by Clash Royale. Clash Royale is a mobile strategy game where you fight for honor and glory against other players. Each player has a battle deck that they personally create and load up with troops and spells. You gain access to a massive selection of troops to build your deck that you'll also build up over time. And by higher levels of the game, you may even run into different builds every single match. Each troop and spell is unique and provides a different utility. For example, archers are a ranged attacker with less HP that you can hide behind your giants, who will tank damage from enemy towers. Now, I'm no expert at the game, but I've found that if you can control the pace of the game by placing your units in bursts, you can catch your opponent off guard. By making your opponent play reactively instead of proactively, you've basically just won control. Spells are an important part of your deck and can change the tide of a game when played right. For example, if you place a fireball in the right spot between two towers or between enemies and a tower, you can place all of them into your AoE and deal massive damage. Your ultimate goal is to take all 3 crowns or the enemy's middle tower in order to win the duel. In order to do that though, you'll have to outplay your opponent by spending your in-game elixir wisely. With a stacked deck and strong reasoning, you'll be able to decimate your opponent's defenses and claim victory. Outside of battle, it's time to get stronger by leveling up your troops. You'll get coins for completing challenges and playing matches, and you can use them to increase your power. You'll also get chests at the end of games that will allow you to draw some cards and improve your deck with new troops and upgrades. Send in princes, knights, baby dragons, and powerful spells to claim a glorious victory. Download Clash Royale with the QR code on screen and join me on this journey for glory in Clash Royale. Thanks Clash Royale for sponsoring, and let's get back to the video. So I'll go over the exact amount of energy recharge that you need in the build section where I talk about artifacts specifically, but first I want to talk about weapons because there's basically only 2 to 3 options that you really have, even when you're playing Lisa as a damage dealer. The main go-to weapon for Lisa is going to be Favonius Codex. Now, a lot of players will opt to go for something that deals more damage, with Sith, Kagura's Verity, etc. But the problem is if you want to get the most value out of Lisa and the most value for your teams, you need to be using Lisa's Burst. Enemy defense shred is incredibly strong and basically necessary in every single team comp you run her in. Because you don't actually have Lisa on field actively using her elemental skill to generate energy unless you're in an Aggravate team, you are gonna need those extra particles from Favonius whenever you swap to her and do a normal attack or something to instantly generate some particles. If you do play her in an Aggravate team, it's possible you're gonna be getting her particles from her elemental skill, but that's already accounted for in the energy recharge calculation. You're still gonna need a lot of energy recharge. Many players talk about Lisa as a Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers user, and she can be okay for that, but if you want to really get the most out of Lisa, that defense shred is going to do wonders for you. If you're okay using her burst every other rotation or once every 3 rotations to lower enemy defense, then Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers can be an okay weapon for that. But if you want to get that defense shred at every given opportunity to buff the rest of your team's damage effectively, you're going to need that energy recharge weapon. Now, other options you may have are things like Fruit of Fulfillment, which is going to be a free-to-play craftable option. It's the Sumeru craftable catalyst, and it has an energy recharge main stat. Outside of that, you also have Prototype Amber to try to help battery the rest of your team, but she doesn't see much value on that, and honestly, if you're going to use Prototype Amber, at that point, I would just use Thrilling Tales instead, and I kind of just went over how that weapon works. Now, if you're using Lisa in an Aggravate team with Fischl or Raiden, who can help you generate a ton of energy while you're on field, that's a different story. You can use any sort of DPS weapons that you might have, whether that's a 5-star crit weapon, or the 4-star with Sith, which is an amazing damage catalyst weapon, or Solar Pearl if you manage to have the battle pass. For general use though, I still stand by this. Favonius Codex is an amazing weapon and I can't recommend it enough. I would only look into strict DPS weapons if you're using Fischl and Raiden on her team with Lisa on field. Otherwise, Fav Codex is the way to go, and if you want to use Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers on her, you can, but generally speaking, it's going to be a lot harder to get your burst up and provide less value to you than if you had her burst every rotation to lower enemy defense and effectively increase your team's overall damage. Not to mention a last note on the Thrilling Tales thing, if you do use Favonius Codex, you can use her burst more, and if you run Noblesse on her as a generalist support, you're going to see that attack buff more often as well. Speaking of Noblesse, let's get into the artifact section. For Lisa before AR45, which is the only time most players will actually use her, her value as a damage dealing unit diminishes a fair bit, but it's sort of okay for early content. Either way, I would still recommend that you give her a support set like 4-piece Instructors or 4-piece Exile. Instructors is going to give you Elemental Mastery whenever she's on-field proccing a reaction, and 4-piece Exile is going to help your team generate more energy. To get the most out of her, you sort of have to decide what role she's in for you. As a damage dealer, you want to give her something like attack % Sands, electro damage, or attack % Goblet, and an attack % or crit circlet. That said, for a supporting character, which is what I recommend, I would just pick the pieces that have the most energy recharge, including an energy recharge Sands. After AR45 is when Lisa becomes an actually decent unit though, and she has 3 roles you can play her in. The best one, in my opinion, is Hyperbloom, where you'll abuse her Elemental Mastery scaling and trigger Dendro Cores. For this setup, you have a few different options, but the best one is going to be 4-piece Gilded Dreams for the EM and attack % that it gives. If you don't have a good 4-piece Gilded Dreams set, you can mix up Elemental Mastery sets or go with 2-piece Emblem for some energy recharge. Now, on the topic of energy recharge, Lisa needs a ton of it to function well. I know I sound like a broken record at this point, and it's honestly her biggest bottleneck. On field with Fischl or Raiden, she can need between 130 and 140% energy recharge, but without Fischl or Raiden, she needs between 160 and 180 energy recharge if you're playing her on field. If you play her solely as an off-field unit that you just swap on to use her burst, she will likely need at least bare minimum 200% energy recharge, and honestly you're probably going to need a little bit more, which impacts her elemental mastery a fair bit. On top of the fact that her burst is unlikely to hit Dendro Cores without Constellations, if you don't have a C4 Lisa, I recommend using her on field. Now with that said, I recommend Elemental Mastery or Energy Recharge Sands, an EM Goblet, and an EM Circlet for Hyperbloom Lisa. For an Aggravate Lisa, you would use her with 4-piece Thundering Fury, which allows her to gain bonus Aggravate damage and Electro damage, but also use her elemental skill more. Otherwise, if you don't have 4-piece Thundering Fury, you can mix 2-piece sets that give Elemental Mastery and 2-piece sets that give attack %. For stats, just go with an attack % Sands, Electro Damage Goblet, and crit rate or damage Circlet. If you're playing Lisa with attack buffs, you can opt for an Elemental Mastery Sands, but since she scales with EM anyways when she levels up, you shouldn't really need a ton more. This is because she already has low base attack as well, and so all of that attack you can give her will be really helpful. As far as energy recharge, since you have the opportunity to use huge skill nukes, you don't need as much as Hyperbloom Lisa, so go for around 130% energy recharge with Fischl or Raiden, or 160 if you don't have either of those two. Lastly, for a generalist support defense shred build, you can give her 4-piece Noblesse. The hard part about this is that she'll see virtually no field time, so you're almost exclusively limited to Favonius to give her quick particles, even though in theory, Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers would be much better. That said, she just needs a ton of energy recharge. However much you have on this build might not even be enough. I would stack Energy Recharge Sands, and for your Goblet and Circlet, just go with whatever main stats have the best energy recharge substats. That was a ton of info, so I've added chapters to the video so you can skip to whatever build you want to focus on. Next up, I'll talk about teams so that way you guys can understand exactly how you should play Lisa and who you should play her with. So Lisa's teams are pretty restrictive just due to the nature of Dendro teams, with there being 1 Electro and 1 Dendro healer at the time of releasing this video. That said, I'll try to explain everything I can. Her best Hyperbloom team is a combination of Lisa, Yelan, Xingqiu, and Nahida. Lisa's gonna basically just be on field triggering Hyperblooms for the most part. If you have C4 Lisa, you can swap to Nahida and just create more cores while her burst does the work, but if you don't have Constellation 4, you're probably gonna be hitting less cores and it becomes less worth it. Nahida is going to apply tons of Dendro, Yelan and Xingqiu are going to apply tons of Hydro, and also because there's so much Hydro going out, you're going to also get some Electro Charge damage as well. It's going to enable blooms for Lisa to trigger Hyperblooms between these 3, and lots of energy particles are going to be generated, especially if you're using Favonius on Yelan or Xingqiu. Now, if you don't have these two, you can swap out Yelan or Xingqiu for someone like Kokomi, and she'll help you out with some healing, which can be really, really nice. Or if you need to, you can also use the free-to-play equivalent, which is going to be Barbara. And lastly, if you need a Dendro healer, you can also swap one of them out for Yao Yao, and that will make it so you can heal up your team. team. One thing to note about Hyperbloom is because of the type of reaction that Hyperbloom is, it actually isn't affected by Lisa's defense shred. The reason that she gets benefits out of the defense shred is because Yelan, Xingqiu, and Nahida all deal a lot of damage personally, and that's going to essentially allow you to take advantage of that defense shred and increase your team's damage substantially. Outside of a Hyperbloom setup, you have Lisa Aggravate, which features a second Electro, a Dendro, and a Flex. So in this case, I actually recommend Fischl, Yao Yao, and Kazuha, but my Yao Yao isn't leveled, so I'm actually using Nahida in this setup. Now, the downside is that in this setup that I'm using specifically, there's no healer, which is why I recommend Yao Yao, but you also technically can use Kuki Shinobu. The downside of using her is that you're not going to get nearly as much overall team damage, because when you're using Lisa here in this team, you're going to be triggering Fischl's Ascension 4 passive. And her Ascension 4 passive is going to make her deal extra electro damage that has no internal cooldown whenever you cause that electro reaction. So overall, she adds a lot of damage to the team. Kazuha is also really helpful because he can group up everyone for Lisa's burst if you want to keep shredding defense. And overall, this is a solid team. Now, if you don't have Kazuha or if you don't have a healer for these two slots, you can go with someone like Jean if you want to, or if you need to go Sayu, you can also do that as well. And lastly, you can also use a cryo shielder or healer. You can use Diona or you can use Zhongli. Now, technically, you can also use Lisa in something like a taser setup, or you could go double hydro taser with Yelan instead of Fischl. That's also an option you have, but the damage is a lot lower, so I don't typically recommend this team, but you can use it in Overworld and it's pretty good. Lastly, you can use Lisa in Ye Old Eula setup. This will allow you to lower enemy defense and allows Eula to nuke bosses specifically who can get hit easily by Lisa's burst. The downside of this is energy, since Eula teams already suffer from low energy and Lisa needs a lot to get her burst personally, and she's not going to be on field much because you're going to be attacking with Eula to maximize your damage. So in this setup, you can run into some energy bottlenecks, and overall, I don't think this is a particularly good team, but it's an option that you have for Eula teams if you choose to use it. And also, just as a side note, if you decide to use Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayer's Lisa, you can go ahead and pass that buff to Eula. This is where you would build her as a generalist support. Overall, Lisa, even though she's not an amazing unit, she can still find a lot of use, and if you enjoy her new character skin, her playstyle, her aesthetic, anything about Lisa, if you kill Lisa, whatever it may, you're looking the wrong way. Whatever that may be, if you want to play her, hopefully this guide helped you out. I go live on Twitch a few days a week at twitch.tv/Braxophone, so if you guys want to come hang out, ask questions, or even just flex your Lisa, feel free to drop by. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll catch you next time.